Nearly 4 million people live in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. Perhaps no big city has such an abundance of nature right at its back door.
This is like what Central Park is to New York.
Trish Hayes has been a Nairobi National Park fan for many years. On the border of one of Africa's fastest growing cities, it is home to endangered rhinos, lions, buffalo, giraffes, more than 400 species. The British first protected the land in the 1940s, and it has remained unspoiled. Until now.
Respect our laws! Respect our animals!
Kenya's government is extending the country's new Chinese-built railway straight through the heart of the park, splitting the cherished preserve in two and igniting a firestorm. Opponents say they were blindsided. Until his death earlier this year, Sidney Kuntai led the coalition fighting the route. He said construction started before most Kenyans understood where the train would go.
In the last 1 year and a half, witnessed a very big threat to the Nairobi National Park. This matter was kept in the dark. All Kenyans knew about was phase one of Mombasa to Nairobi.
Chinese contractors erected massive concrete pillars, an elevated track visible from one end of the preserve to the other. The railway, known as the SGR, is a vital link in China's trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, a massive effort to build railways, roads and ports linking China to Africa, Asia and Europe. China said it hopes to lift emerging economies like Kenya's with new trade and manufacturing. But there's also an environmental price to pay. According to the World Wildlife Federation, hundreds of threatened and endangered species stand in the way of China's construction plans. Critics say that in the rush for jobs, Kenya's government failed to properly study the environmental impact. Lawyer Okia Omtata Okoiti joined conservationists in legal action aiming to halt the extension.
So I got orders stopping phase 2 until we had a few basic minimums, a few basics in place, like an environmental survey to understand what is the impact of the SGR on the environment. A socio-economic survey, what's the impact of the SGR when the communities where it is going to pass.
But ultimately, the challenges lost in court.
All these things are not in place, and the Chinese are busy blasting.
The Kenya Railways Corporation and Chinese builders declined to answer VOA's questions or agree to interviews about Nairobi National Park. But the Kenya Wildlife Agency did allow VOA to visit the Tsavo National Park in central Kenya to see the SGR's impact there. The railway's first leg, from Nairobi to Mombasa, opened a year ago. It cuts through the 5,000 square mile preserve. A busy highway and older rail line already split the park. The new train adds yet another obstacle, disrupting wildlife migration and attracting human squatters. Dr. Ben Okita is with Save the Elephants. He is helping Kenya Wildlife to study the environmental effects.
One major impact that the SGR has had on the ecosystem, and that is to do with interfering with the contiguous environment and ecosystem. So it's contributing to further splitting of Tsavo East and Tsavo West National Park.
The Chinese built 8 high overpasses to allow wildlife in some areas to move freely under the train. To see if they're working, Okita uses GPS collars to tag elephants and track their movements. His maps show signs that the animals are confused.
There is crossing, but then you can see there's some sections here where the animal tends to be struggling. Yes, they are doing a lot of pacing here. So you see it's quite dark red here. So as much as they want to cross, they just can't. They just keep pacing.
Making matters worse, humans are drawn to the overpasses because they create park access for livestock and scavenging.
And because of those human settlements, when animals want to come through, they reach a point where they're scared. When you're coming in, you saw people walking around here. Then that underpass eventually is rendered useless for wildlife to use.
The Chinese built concrete and wire fence guards the track from animals, But they are failing.
This outer fence line is hardly 1 year old, and you can see it's already seriously damaged by wildlife. And because of that, the risks of wildlife crossing over the railway and causing accidents are very high.
Now, all the original fencing is being replaced. Alex Mwazo of Kenya Wildlife Service is on the research team at Tsavo. He said most animals, zebras, buffaloes, antelopes, even lions, are slowly adjusting. One exception, the giraffes.
The only species so far which we have not recorded and seen utilizing the underpass is the giraffe. Giraffes tend to be a shy animal, so it will take time before they actualize and gain the confidence and start utilizing the underpasses.
Lala Frederick is the leader of Mwazo's research team. Although buffalo and other animals have been hit by the train, Mwazo said SGR is less of a risk than trucks where the highway also splits the park.
The main problem is not even the railway. I think the road that is just adjacent to the railway is the main problem, because it's just like a brick wall.
While scientists studied the impact of Tsavo, Kenyans looked on with alarm as the train cut Nairobi National Park in two. Their protests in March came too late. By that time, Chinese builders had bulldozed into the preserve, quickly erecting an imposing row of towering pillars to carry the overhead track. Eventually, the route will extend north to the Ugandan border. Longtime neighbors say the government turned its back on the park's heritage. Kitengela Glass sits at the end of a long dirt road in Olusekron, south of the park. Owner Nani Crows has collected newspaper clippings documenting every twist of the railway construction.
They had so many different maps, and it was, I'm sure, to confuse people because nobody knew when were we going to be invaded. President Uhuru Kenyatta had asked those with land through which infrastructural projects are passing through to surrender it. Otherwise, the president said the government will forcibly seize it.
Crows said something precious is being forever lost.
We have so few animals, wild animals, African animals. Where do you find them? In Kenya, maybe a few in Tanzania, maybe a few, not even Uganda anymore. And how can you, this is such a treasure. This is the treasure of the world. And here we come, and then you sell it to the Chinese for a railway? Bloody hell.
But for Nairobi National Park, it appears there's no turning back.